Good morning. Welcome to Always Ageless, the show where we celebrate living life to its fullest at every age and every stage. I'm your host, Valerie Vandazilver, and I'm coming to you live this beautiful morning. I often say that my 106-year-old mother, Alice, is the embodiment of what it means to be always ageless, living independently, full of life, and proving that age is strictly just a number. And today's conversation is all about making that kind of independence possible for all of us. Here's a question I want you to think about. What if you could know right now, today, whether your home would support you as your age? Not guesswork, not hoping for the best, not thinking sure everything's fine, but knowing actually. And what if someone could tell you honestly whether staying put is the right choice or whether finding a new space would actually give you more freedom, more safety, not less? Well, that's what our guest does. And her story, it is remarkable. When I first saw just even a clip about her, I knew that she would be a perfect guest for us. And I'm so honored that she's with us today. Imagine training. And I do this. I see these things happen when I tell you her story. I watch so carefully. Imagine training your whole life, giving everything you have, spending hours every day focusing on one thing, and then you miss the Olympic sports by 1/10 of a second. A heartbeat, a blink, that crushing disappointment that could have ended her story. But for Carol Chang, it was just the beginning of a new phase. Today, Carol is inducted in the McGill Sports Hall of Fame. She's a licensed occupational therapist with 27 years of clinical experience, the founder of Evolving Homes, and the author of a brand new book that was launched just last summer, Age in Place or Find a New Space: How to Create Beautiful Spaces that Promote Meaningful Interactions. But here's what makes Carol extraordinary. Not all of those things, there's even more. She's not just another voice telling you to install grab bars and widen your doorways. She's working with MIT's Age Lab. She's working with the Toyota, yes, the Toyota Research Institute, AARP, and some of the world's leading financial institutions to revolutionize how we think about aging. We're talking caregiving robots, and Carol just came back from Las Vegas from the Consumer Electronics Seminar, and I'm so anxious to hear what she found there. She's talking about smart home technology, virtual rehabilitation, design solutions so beautiful that you wouldn't even know they have anything to do with aging or accessibility. So Carol brings something really rare to this conversation: brutal honesty mixed with boundless optimism, which we all want to hear when it comes to our aging. She's going to tell you whether aging in place makes dollar and sense, or and when it doesn't. And she'll show you $1 million solutions and $5 solutions. Those are more, I think, on my price range. And she'll prove that with the right planning, aging can be about empowerment, freedom, innovation, fun, opportunity, not decline. So whether you're in your 40s thinking about, should you even be thinking of this? You're in 60s starting to thinking maybe you should make plans, or whether you're like many of us, you're helping aging parents make plans and make serious and sometimes really hard decisions. This conversation is for you. Carol Chang, welcome to Always Ageless. We are so glad to have you with us.
I am so glad to be here. How exciting. What a wonderful introduction. So excited to dive into these things. So many great potential topics that we could move around here. I don't know if 54 minutes is going to be enough.
Well, I hope not, because there's a lot that I want to hear from. I want to hear about the Consumer Electronics Show and all of your experience, your background. And so let's just get started talking about some of your really special moments in your life. Let's talk about the incredible moment in 1996, missing the Olympics team by 1/10 of a second. We all watch that on TV. We see the Olympic trials and we see the Olympics, the actual, athletes at the Olympics and how they miss something. And you wonder, how could this possibly happen? Because they've tried, they've practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced. And how do you get there and you slip off the balance beam, right? You know better. How does that happen? And what do you possibly feel like?
So thanks so much for that inspiring question. I haven't answered that in quite a long time. What's really interesting is it is very heartbreaking to work so hard. I mean, really, I was training 30 hours a week. I was a full-time student. And because of that athlete mentality, I just could not let myself even take half classes to make something easier. It was like, nope, if you're going to do this, we're going to figure this out at whatever expense. But that is a really difficult thing, and I included that story in my book, not because it was talking about the Olympics, but truly to inspire people that even from somebody who was at an Olympic level caliber, I still went through the same thing of having to start small again, rebuilding my body, after I had kids, after, several years of just, not living that kind of lifestyle. And my goal being that everybody could do it. But your original question was, how did I feel about it? That heartbreak, it's hard. And I'll tell you, I have not watched the Olympics. I haven't watched the Olympics in 20 years. I think just the most recent one was the first time that I watched swimming. And as an adult watching that, I could have sympathy and compassion for how heartbreaking the Olympics are. I think the Olympics in general just, encompass that idea of every single person has worked their tail off. And when it comes down to it, everyone's just slamming into the wall at the same time. I mean, it could be any one of those on any given day, at any time. And you recognize that sometimes in life you can work really, really hard and it still comes down to just a little bit of luck. But what you want to do is stack the deck toward in your favor. You do everything that you can possibly do, and then you just have to let go and you have to say, well, as it happens, I will work it out. And if it doesn't this time, it's okay, because there are other ones later. It's not the end of the world.
No, but I think often also, no matter what we do, people may say, "Well, I'm not an Olympic swimmer. I'm not an Olympic athlete." And that's true. But we do things in life, whether it's making a sale, whether it's making a presentation. How was I off? Right? Did I really give my best? Was I really prepared? Had I prepared myself to meet with those people in their life situation right now? Right? What could I have done to be more meaningful at that time? And I think, because I'm not an Olympic athlete, I try to think of that as, what could I do to make sure that I'm prepared and that I'm always on top? And I think that's something that the Olympics can bring to people every day. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. And there is no such thing as failure. Those are learning experiences. They're things that you learn later on. And it's a really interesting topic, because I love this idea of starting to renovate or think about your aging in place needs when you buy your first house. And people think I'm totally crazy, but hear me out and it'll make sense to you. And that's that we need lots of learning opportunities, because we don't know what we like until we try it. And by starting when you are in your 20s and 30s, you buy that first house. Listen, most houses are going to need some amount of remodeling. You are going to put aside a budget when you buy a house, that the pink bathroom has got to go, or, we've got to get that ugly wallpaper off. So you're putting money into these things. And at that moment, it's a great time for you to just stop for a second and think, well, if I end up living in this house until I need some kind of support, what could I be doing? And even if the answer is that you wouldn't even do anything right now, it's the process, the preparation of thinking ahead and saying, okay, like if I needed to do that, what are those things and how much could they cost? I have a general idea. And you learn from that. And one of the most interesting examples I've seen is walk-in bathtubs, because people expect that because I've taken baths my whole life, that is absolutely what I would want. And I have actually had people move out of the house that they put a walk-in bathtub into, because they realize how much they hate it. They don't recognize that until they have it and they try it. And that's experience. And then you can move on and find something that is more associated with your preferences.
I can relate to this so much. We just finished building a house, and there were so many things that, as we were going through the process, because of my work with seniors, now that I would think, but what if? So we were having to to position a gate to go out or in a certain direction and a certain width. And I said, yes, but what if I have a walker, right? Or the stairs were too many stairs, or we were going to put an interesting point. We're going to put a front, what I would call a porch, and they didn't. The designer didn't think we needed a big one. I said, yes, but if I'm in a walker or a wheelchair and I'm on this place and I have to open the door, I can't fall off the stairs because this porch area isn't big enough. Right. So there were several things that I thought of. And so, to your point, when someone's young and buying their first home, if you think about not only for you when you're living in it yourself, but if I was going to sell this home and my client might be, should I make, and I'm going to remodel the bathroom anyway, right? Should I do this, this, and this? So I think that's a really interesting point that we should talk about more, especially as we have an aging population.
Well, and listen, it is not just about an aging population that benefit from things like universal design. These are things that create visitability. It encourages people who might also have other needs to come to your house. So
Yeah.
it's easy enough for somebody in a wheelchair or walker. I mean, lastly, really, like, what do people do in their 20s and 30s? They buy a new house and they have a baby. Well, strollers are in the exact
Well,
same
that's true.
situation. So
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
think about that, you're doing this in your 20s and 30s, you get to benefit from all of those different changes for many more decades of your life. And even if you decide to upgrade later, that you have because you want to have more kids or for whatever reason, I talk about this as being like a social good activity because you're putting it into the
Absolutely.
market where people who may not have had your preparation or insight into this now have the option to buy something already ready made. 95% of all homes are not ready for
Yeah,
even
correct.
mobility aids. 95%. Unless you're actually doing home modification, you are going to require some changes, or you will be forced to have another option, which might be senior living or something else, which for unfortunately for most people, only 16% of people can even afford that. So very difficult choices if you're not planning ahead.
It's interesting because I'm helping a friend market a home right now that it's her listing, and it has a detached structure in the back that was built to be a bedroom and bath, granny flat or whatever. But no one thought about marketing that home as a multi-gen home.
Mm.
Never thought about putting that category with the listing. They're just marketing it with this separate structure. So we did a couple of videos about being multi-gen. And interesting that last weekend at the open house, almost everybody who came was looking for something for another family member. So we all, like you said, we all need to be aware of this. Whether it's someone who's, and especially in some cultures, is the Asian culture, and we have a large Asian culture in this area. A lot of them, it's just their culture that the in-laws live with them, the grandparents live with them, whether they're old or not. I think they all just live together, and the same with the Hispanic populations.
Well, and even with beyond a multi-gen, it's really nice to have that space for a caregiver. So a live-in caregiver with their own a little bit of personal space. They don't have to live in your house, but they can live close enough that if you need anything, even at 3 a.m., that they could be reachable, and it's right there. So I
Yeah.
think there's huge value in seeing that. And I think really people probably don't think about labeling it like that because in general, people don't like to think about what happened or their aging plan. This has been the biggest challenge. It's difficult one to envision ourselves as an older adult and what that might mean. And because they don't think about it, they also don't associate any of those benefits when they're looking at that. So it's really about education.
Well, and talk about value right now. I mean, value is in single story homes. And where we are, other parts of the country where they've got large lots and a lot of space, you don't see, it's not a problem. But where we are, then all the new homes are 2 and 3 stories tall.
Mhm.
And if you have a single story home, I mean, that should be marketed as look at all the value you have because you have a single story home. So but let's go back to you. So you went from the pool at McGill University earning degrees in occupational therapy and anatomy. So, what drew you to occupational therapy? And did you have then any idea that you'd eventually be working with MIT and Toyota, of all places, on the future of aging?
Yeah. So, what did I love about OT? Occupational therapists use something what's called therapeutic use of self. And what that means is that we use our life experience in order to bring value and therapeutic healing, I guess, to a whole situation. So to make that easy, you think about physical therapy as being very direct, very easy to understand. I hurt my knee, I do these exercises, I feel better. And
Right.
occupational therapy is misunderstood, I think, also because it is very broad, and it means I'm looking at that holistic view of you. So I'm not just looking at the knee, I'm looking at, how does that knee impact your ability to perform your activities of daily living? So that's dressing, bathing, grooming, all these things. But beyond just those functional things, those life things, we're really interested in what makes you happy, what makes your life
Yeah.
meaningful. Like, how do you embrace the whole person and the caregivers and your friends and your community? How do you tie all that in there? And so we're addressing all of those things in very problem solving ways. I call it the mix of art and science. It really is a 50-50. And it's very, very client centered, based on that person's goals, their preferences, their aspirations, and we work together as a team to do that. It really spoke to the kinds of things that I value, the customization of things, and listening to those deeper values, and poking underneath the surface, because I feel like sometimes things are too medical. They're too much like, can you do this to survive? And I'm saying, look, surviving's not enough. You need to thrive. You need something in your life to be able to push you to exercise, because maybe you don't like that. I mean, lots of people don't like that. I mean, I have a saying, and it is sanity over vanity. So I
Oh,
exercise for my brain so I feel calm and happy. And I also call it my CEO time. Like, rhythmical walking is really, really good for getting ideas.
so I love that you're also a realtor. So what caused you to add that to your toolkit? And how does that dual perspective change the conversations that you have with families, or does it?
Yeah, absolutely. That actually started because I had a really good friend who was a realtor. And because I'm an occupational therapist, and I have a strong interest in home modification, I envisioned this idea of us pairing together and being a version of Love It or List It. And I actually pitched this idea to, I think it was HGTV. It was so many years ago. I pitched this idea to them. Of course, I didn't hear back or anything. But I happened to be talking to somebody in the technology world who was working on, smart home technology, and he said, you know what, that's a really good idea. I think that we should run with that. And the next thing you know, I was getting my realtor's license and we were having weekly meetings and scheduling out the filming of a pilot, that a sizzle reel is what they call it, in order to have a showrunner sell it to, like, HGTV and Netflix and those such shows. There are so many instances where somebody's house requires so much modification. Like you said, maybe it's 2, 3 stories, or for whatever reason, they haven't kept up with the maintenance. It's just too much work for the amount of time there. But the house next door that's for sale is perfect. So it made me realize that that was another option, that your options didn't have to be your house that's not really working, that's going to require a lot of money, skilled nursing, or a retirement community that may not be where you want to be. Maybe you want to stay in your community. So why don't we take that as another option? And what I loved about when I started doing that was that it created this objective measure to say, this is probably not the best place for you. And, like, let's just look at the money part of it. So I would sit down with a spreadsheet and I would say, look, don't have the sticker shock of the cost of the house next door. Look at your house, add in, like, the construction costs, add in those emotional costs. See, there's more than just the money.
Yeah.
Are you ready to sit through 6 to 8 weeks, that could go to 12 weeks, of renovations, people in and out of your house, trying to manage all these things? Like, are you really interested in doing that? Or is it a little bit better? Can we put it on the other side and say, you know what, the net cost to my sanity and the net cost to my wallet are better next door.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, having something objective to lean on, I think, was a really big reason why I started down that route.
Those are all great thoughts. And not only the physical remodel, but I've just gone through this, the
Yes.
actual pain of having to select every little thing.
Yes.
What color do you want the doorknob to be? And color are the hinges of the doors that go to the garage? Okay, well, they have to be the same color. And, what shape do you want? And all of these things and the tile and this and that. It is not easy to do
It's
anything like
cognitive
that.
overwhelm, right?
Oh my
People
gosh.
just get so overwhelmed.
Oh my gosh. I hated that house long before it was built. Now it's finished and I happen to love it. But anyway, so then you spent 12 years in home health watching Medicare reimbursement shrink while the patient needs grew. Carol, what were you seeing that made you say, I have to do something different?
I guess by now it's probably been about 15 to 16 years, but at that time, it people had figured out that it was cheaper for them to send out people to the home in a home health setting than it was to have them stay in inpatient rehab. Because every day that they stayed in inpatient rehab, it was costing $1,000 to $1,500 each day.
Yeah.
So at that time, home health was so much cheaper. I can't remember what the amount was, but like the multiple was really low. And the only I guess consideration was, look, as long as they're making progress and you can document like objective improvements, you can see them as long as you want because it's cheaper. You're saving us money than keeping them in
Right.
hospital.
Yeah.
So at that time, people would have a stroke, and I could easily get three times a week covered for 6 months. I could work with them on every little thing, look through equipment, make sure I was there for installs, talking to the
Mhm.
contractors. I'm in the home, I'm working on these actual projects. It was completely reasonable, and honestly, by 6 months, we could even discharge them, and they wouldn't even have to go to outpatient. So we could take care of them completely like that. But as people have probably realized, things change, and
They do.
it got progressively tighter and tighter with more and more rules and more checklists and hurdles to justify the need for care. And we got to a point, I think, where the agencies themselves they just couldn't be financially sound unless they capped out how many visits you had. And so they had figured out that the break even point was about 20 visits, and that would include OT, PT, speech, respiratory, nursing. I mean, it's not a lot of visits. And
No.
so for me, I was watching this difficult declining quality of care because we couldn't actually do all the things that we felt like they needed. We had to do the things that were medically approved. So, for example, arm exercises would strengthen, and that would be approved. But looking for a shower chair that in order to get a shower is not approved because that's not a skilled service. That's something a caregiver could do. That's something that somebody else could do. But I would argue that how do you decide among the 10,000 options which one is appropriate to that person? So that was starting the journey towards me realizing that people deserve to have another option, even if it was not a covered option. At least that families who could see the value in having somebody assess a person's needs before they left the hospital, could they figure all that out so that the environment was ready by the time they did the discharge? Because in the current system, by the time that I had left, um, what was happening was, actually, I'll tell you the straw that broke the camel's back was I
Okay.
had a very young stroke and who was a complete hemiplegia. That means that she literally had no motion in her arm or her
Um,
leg, nothing.
um,
And she was young. She had little
um,
kids, and she, had a life that she needed to get back to. And they approved 4 visits for occupational therapy only. And because I'm an occupational therapist and not an assistant, I cost too much money. So they were going to give
oh,
me just me to do the initial assessment, give the visit to an assistant for 2 visits, and I would come back and basically spend the discharge visit doing paperwork. And I said, that is ridiculous. I quit. This is not care. This is absolutely horrific. And I could see the stress on everybody's faces. So I started a business to address the hospital to home environment. So again, just bridging that gap. It was not a covered
mhm.
service, but people appreciated having at least another option. And because it was private, I could take care of things before they left the hospital. Because in the current environment, hospitals are considered Part A Medicare, and home health is considered Part A Medicare. That means that you cannot have overlapping services.
Mm.
So the way that looks in real life is that the home health person can't assess the environment and give recommendations to have this grab bar put up or that shower chair put in until they're actually in the home. So what would
Mhm.
happen is that I would open the door and these people are saying, these panicked families are looking at me saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. You can give them a shower." And I said, "I'm so sorry, but I am required to do all this paperwork today. I can't even do that, even though that person has been home for 6 days and has not had a shower yet." But and the saddest thing is that by the time that you get all of the paperwork done and, things organized, for the shower to be the bars in, the equipment in, we're already discharged. So what was the whole point of
Sure.
having
Yeah, no
care? It
point.
was ridiculous.
No point. Yep.
Yeah, ridiculous.
So something we all can relate to, many of us, including myself, and I'm sure you as well. So tell us about the exhausted caregivers that you meet.
Oh,
What were
yes.
those at that time? What were they struggling with that even the medical system just wasn't even addressing? And I think you've just talked about it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, by that moment, I think everything was so strained. Everybody in with even in the hospital, the most common phrase I would hear when I would do assessments is, "Why didn't they tell me this at the hospital?"
Yeah.
And and I wish I had a good answer for them. And I would always try to be very, give the benefit of the doubt. But really, the truth is that everybody is so strained and strapped, and what they want to do, what they are required to do, is just make sure that you can get out there safely, that you don't fall and come back to the hospital and incur the hospital an additional fee for all of those things, right? They're just doing the bare minimum to just keep their head above water. So it's not their fault. They just, within the
No.
system, there is no time for the education that people need. Like caregivers need education about how to transfer a patient
Mhm.
safely so they don't hurt their own backs, so that then if they hurt themselves, who's taking care of the patient then? and,
Yeah.
and there's just, and even down to expectation, like when this person who was perfectly independent before they had a car accident, and now they're coming back to you in a dependent position, and you have never been a caregiver, never trained to do any of
Yeah.
these things, how are you going to manage this even emotionally? Like, forget about even the physically, which you do need training, but how are you going to manage the emotional components of this? This is a complete change in your dynamic of husband and wife, or child, parent and child. These are a lot of emotional things that OTs want to bring up and talk about, because it affects your ability to perform. And depression, burnout, these
Mhm.
are major things with caregivers that they suffer from. And there's
Well,
actually
yeah.
statistics with dementia caregivers. Sometimes they pass away before the patient does. And really, I think I talk about this in my book, that half the time I'd open the door and the caregiver looks worse than the patient does,
Yeah.
because they're doing
Yeah.
everything.
It's interesting. I talk about this sometimes when my dad was towards the end of his life, and I wasn't not accepting how close he was to the end of his life, but I hadn't had any experience with that either. But I asked the doctor if I could bring him home for Christmas, and the doctor said, "Valerie, if you bring him home, you're doing it for you, and you're going to be in the casket next to him." And I didn't understand that at all. I thought, there's nothing wrong with me. But of course, now that I was through it with him and now with my mom, with other people that I help, yeah, I just see that and you just don't know what to do. And I think a lot of it, which is off the subject right now, a lot of us, we just don't know we don't know what to expect. We have no way to manage expectations. I don't know how long somebody was going to live.
No.
If I'd known my dad was going to die a week later, I would have handled things differently, but we don't know. And so yeah, this is not being a caregiver. For me, a lot of it is the unknowns
Yes.
as much as the knowns.
Unfamiliar, unknown, the worry. Am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Could I hurt them? Like, which are the things that have high consequences? Which are the things that have low consequences? When you can't distinguish between either, both of them become high level, and now you're adding to your stress and your burden.
Yeah.
And I talk about this in my book, about how, for most people, the only experience they have with caregiving is with small children. But that is a completely different scenario. Small children, get a cold and they're terrible. You might not sleep for 2 nights or 3 nights, and, but they get better. They get better after a period of time. And maybe even that's 2 weeks. But that is not that is nowhere near the kind of strain that people are feeling when you have a neurodegenerative diagnosis where something can go on for 3 years, 10 years, 20 years. Like if it's a, chronic, congestive heart failures. I've have had patients where I saw them on and off for 15 years. Hi, how are you doing again? I'm so sorry to see that you're back in the hospital. And right? This is really difficult. This is chronic,
Yeah.
long-term stuff that
Yeah.
nobody has experience with until they actually
Are in
find
that
themselves in that
situation.
position.
So, Carol, you created Evolving Homes and this service called Age in Place or Find a New Space. And that title's so refreshing because you're not just pushing one solution. So, walk us through how you help families make some of these critical decisions.
Well, it always comes down to really, really good questions because it doesn't matter what I think or what I want. It matters what they want and what's important to them. And my
Yeah,
job is just for people to give me parameters that I want to stay in this house. I want to stay in this community. I want to live in this kind of home. Like, or maybe some people really actually like to live in two-story homes. I'm very much of an opinion of no blanket solutions.
that's
I
true.
have people come to me and say, should I just, so when I get to a certain age, do I get rid of all the rugs? No more stairs. I can't do this anymore. And I hate that. I hate the
Of course
idea
you do. Of
that
course
there
you
is
do.
nothing that you can't do. And then maybe that is the Olympic athlete mentality in me that makes me even more determined that I'm going to do that because people are trying to tell me that I'm not allowed to do something.
After
So,
what? Yeah.
it really really kind of comes down to having that discussion with people about what's important and then putting that into a priority list and then offering what are your choices based on those parameters. So here's how much it would cost if you went to this location. Here's how much it would be if you went here. Like, what are all the options? Let's just brainstorm, brain dump everything, sort them into the right categories, and then let's figure out the money. Because for me, the money part is the big elephant that nobody likes to talk about, but it is
No,
so vital. I made it chapter 2 because it was so vital. You have to talk about that because without adequate savings, you don't have any options. And it's part of the reason why I very much advocate for having these discussions early. Because my point is that if you start thinking about these things in your 60s, let's say retirement, I'll think about that after I retire. Well, that's too late. Because once you retire, your money flow just ended.
yeah. Oh, I
You have
get
a
it.
fixed next egg, right?
Yep.
So your choice is already made for you. So if you
Yeah.
can like think about that earlier or at least integrate those ideas earlier in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, pay it off early, right? So you don't know what the future can hold.
No.
Get it done early while you're still working and then you can have less stress later on in life.
Sure.
So but to answer your question, it really is that decision making is a joint collaborative effort. And it is my job in this is to show the options and to give ballpark ideas about what are those options relative to the cost and can you afford it and is it worth it to you? Because it may not be something like jewelry in the bathroom that may not be worth it to everybody, but for other people, it's really worth it. That
Yeah.
aesthetic part is important.
Yep. Yep. That's true. That's true. Very true. So as let's talk about your work through the eye of the occupational therapist. So as an OT, you see homes differently than the rest of us. So walk us through a home and what do you notice when you first enter someone's home? What are the red flags that many homeowners just completely miss?
Yeah, so and I love this question because this is exactly why I wrote my book. It was because I can't multiply me and spread me around the country or the world or whatever. I mean, I wanted people to really just have that same experience through my eyes. So I wrote it with literally like I'm pulling into your driveway and what do I see? What am I looking for? What are those like action items you need to be doing right now? And it's funny because people forget about the driveway. They're
No,
thinking so focused on the home because I think maybe there's just too many commercials that are all about the bathroom and the kitchen, and you see pictures, pictures, pictures. And so you forget about the places where people actually have the most falls, which is usually outside in the garden, in like their driveway, you know, down the stairs to the garage. Those are really common areas where people have fallen. And so I'm always in my head thinking, if somebody was rushed or the circumstances were not perfect. It's not this bright blue sky, or like no, nothing on the sidewalk. Like, let's think about this worst case scenario,
Okay.
and where would the problems be? So
Okay.
if somebody had their hands full of packages and it starts raining, and then they start rushing up that space, could they catch their toe on the sidewalk?
Mm.
Could they find themselves struggling and just being a little bit frazzled and forgetting that they have 3 steps, not 2 steps, and they trip on that last step? So I think really, the things that people forget about looking at are those things that they say, it's been there for 30 years. I will never forget it there. It doesn't, that rug is fine, even though it's like a really high pile rug, because I've had it for 30 years. And my point to them is that, yes, that may be true, but in moments of emergency, if you're trying to make it to the bathroom without having an accident, you're focused on getting to the bathroom. And your brain is not always going to be remembering that tripping hazard there. So I'm always looking for anything that sticks up, anything that could be a potential hazard when you're not paying attention or you're in a different mindset. And paying attention to like widths of things, like making sure, I call it path of travel. So making sure that your path of travel to those important places, like bedroom to bathroom, or, let's say in the morning, bathroom to the kitchen, like walk it through as if you were in a wheelchair. So maybe 36 inches, 3 feet wide. Could you make it through these spaces without tripping on cords or dog toys or random like random objects that might fall into your path? Think about it through those lenses as if you were baby proofing for yourself. That in an emergency, like, can I get there quickly, safely? Is there enough light? Is there enough light
Yeah.
for me to
And
see?
task lighting and walkway lighting is another really critical issue.
Absolutely. Yes, you absolutely have to have enough. And that comes down to maintenance. So a lot of times when in all the years that I did home health, I feel like one of the common themes that I would see is people with light bulbs that are burned out, or the smoke detector that's beeping and beeping, and I'd get up on the ladder and change it because it was driving me crazy. But beyond that, it's a safety hazard. But
It is.
why aren't they doing that? Because usually it's dangerous maybe to get up there. They don't have somebody to help them. Maybe they don't have the finances to hire someone to do that. So you end up finding yourself in places that are dark. It's bright and sunny outside, and suddenly you walk in and it like looks like a cavern inside, and there's a pileup of all these boxes because they just don't have the strength or time to put them away. So now I've narrowed up my curve. The carpet is coming up, but there's been nobody here to be able to nail that down or even order something from Amazon to tape it down.
Sure.
So little things often become big things because they just pile up. They don't seem like big things by themselves. It's that they become big things when they're piled up on top of each other.
And what I think is interesting is how much time and mental energy people spend on, oh, our grandchild's coming. So we need to have a baby gate. We need to have this. We need to put something in the plug so the baby doesn't put their fingers there. But grandma and grandpa are coming. Nobody says, oh, well, we need to, right? And
And they should.
right, but it's the same thing, right? If not even
Yes.
more so.
Well,
'Cause
and I can tell you that from experience, I have had this many times where people come for the holidays. Oh, sure, no problem. I've got this figured out. Um, and they have the unfortunate situations where somebody cannot get out of the tub. They're stuck
yeah,
in there and they're trying. And it is so embarrassing for somebody to be so exposed and needing
yeah,
to
yeah,
ask their kids or their daughter-in-law or son-in-law to come and help them get out of the tub or
yeah,
off of the
yeah.
toilet.
Yeah, very, very sad. Very sad. So let's talk about people have say you have a MacGyver style mindset. I've seen that. So for listeners who are thinking, well, how is she like MacGyver? I can't afford a major remodel. What are 3 things people could do this week inexpensively to make their home safer?
Oh man, there's so many. So, and I got that MacGyver nickname because the back of my I had a bin where I had all kinds of like duct tape, old sponges, balls, whatever it was. And so
Huh?
if I'd get into a home and I needed to, make something that could work because they didn't have the finances or nobody to buy it for them and they just couldn't figure it out, then I would just create something for it.
Sure.
So, you know, I think your question about like the top three MacGyver things really kind of has to depend. It depends on the person.
Mhm.
But I will tell you that I've had lots of some of my favorite ones that I like, especially when I did hospital to home, was that a lot of older adults are still under the anesthesia, like the confusion that anesthesia brings. I mean, you don't clear that
Oh,
stuff out as
oh,
quickly as you do when you're younger. You're just not processing everything in
no.
there. And people can be very disoriented. I've had many times where I've been with, sitting with an older adult who says, "Quick, shut the door, all the cats are going to run out." And I'm thinking,
Oh,
"Uh-oh, there are no cats in here." So
uh-oh.
so
Oh,
for families who are trying to bring somebody home, maybe after a broken hip, they need a way to make sure that that person is not getting out of bed, at least not at the very beginning, because that first 10 days, 2 weeks, this is a very high likelihood of going back to the hospital, suffering a secondary fall because of just the weakness that you get in hospital. So I
yeah.
can't remember what the statistic is. It's something like, it only takes 2 weeks until basically, you lose a huge percentage of your muscle mass. And I've had ones where they couldn't even roll over
Mhm.
by that point. There's just so much deconditioning. So what I do with that is that I end up having to I tell people, go get yourself a driveway alarm, the kind where very rich people with long driveways, have like an alert. So as a car like passes that beam, then you'll be alerted that, somebody's coming up your driveway. So I'll have them
Oh,
take that and they put that sensor underneath the bed, and then you're holding on to like the receiver, the is that right, the receiver, the part that is going beep. And so if that person tries to get out of the bed by themselves, as soon as their feet hit the floor, beep 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 beep, and then okay, like, because of course the instruction is, dad,
uh-oh.
make sure to call me if you need to get out of bed to go to the bathroom. But nobody wants to put their family out. They're like, in their head, they're still thinking they feel like them. And they only forget that they're not them when they try to stand up and they realize their legs are jelly. But by then it's too late. So
Yeah.
you need an alert. You need a way to get there.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
and I know we've only got just a little bit of time, but I was going to say my other second favorite thing is wireless doorbells, because they're only about $10, and
Sure,
it's
they
such
are
an
now, yeah.
easy. Yeah, it's super easy. You can buy multiple transmitters. And what you can do is, if you're a caregiver and you don't want to be constantly, trying to watch a baby monitor, which, listen, like, I don't know how effective that is. I mean, all the security guards with all the TVs in front of them, that's the butt of the joke in movies, right? That they fall asleep and they don't see the robber go. So, I mean,
Yeah,
they're not very effective anyway. So,
no.
at the very least, could we provide some relief for a caregiver to go about their business outside, inside, and put transmitters all around the house and give the patient a little clicker, like a little doorbell. So if they need them, then it can just be sent to all the places and they can get their attention quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about your to liken it to MacGyver a little bit. Let's talk about your work with MIT's Age Lab, Toyota Research Institute on robotics. And I
Yes.
have to ask, and I want to get into this a little bit more, and I know we're all so short on time, but I have to ask you, so what does a caregiving robot look like? And what do you learn from these 24 focus groups in the US and in Japan? I'm especially interested about what older adults really want. And I also want to hear from what you saw recently at the Consumer Electronics Show. But let's talk about this.
Yeah.
So
Well,
what is what is
all of those
Toyota
things
Research Institute?
yeah,
Yeah,
all of
what
those
is
things interact, so that's perfect.
yeah,
So, with Toyota, like, I've worked with them about 3 or 4 years, and basically what we're doing is envisioning how could a robot help an older adult in Japan that's on a rural farm away from everybody else? How could they use this robot to be able to take the place of a caregiver? Because of course caregiver shortage is an inevitable thing that is
it is.
slowly starting to happen, but it's going to get progressively worse.
Worse, yeah,
And so
definitely.
envisioning what could that robot help you do? So chores, for example, were a big thing. That's the easiest thing. When it's something like, I say easiest in quotation marks because, of course, at CES, they debuted I think it's called the Neo, and everybody poked fun at this, the Wall Street Journal and everything, about how this is just not ready for prime time yet. I mean, to put one fork into the dishwasher took them 5 minutes. It took you, what, 30 seconds? I mean, it's going that direction. But robotics in the home are definitely the next phase of all of this. We have robotics in industry already that are helping with building cars and building, doing Amazon deliveries and those kinds of things. That's easy. Now we're trying to move it to the home. And I believe LG had come out with a laundry folding robot.
Oh,
um,
good.
yeah, but again, like, listen, you need to tamp your expectations down. Okay, this robot's folding towels. Okay, it's not folding like complicated T-shirts or anything like that. Okay,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and actually, Toyota also has a video like that, actually showing how one of the robotics that we had worked on can fold a T-shirt in the Japanese way. There's a Japanese way to do this really quickly, where they pick up certain things and boom, like, it's done.
Okay.
But from the work that I did at Toyota was really more about touch points, like close interaction. So how would a robot be able to help somebody go from a laying down position in bed to sitting up? Or how would they be able to lift up their legs to get them into the bed or into the shower? Or how could, like, a robot support somebody who maybe took a few steps and realized that they're kind of dizzy and they need to sit down right now, or that their arthritic knees are hurting? you know so from a safety perspective, from a movement perspective, kind of replicating almost what a clinician would do. And then also from a supportive perspective, where if you were the adult caregiver, what would you do during the day? So preparing meals, helping them with exercise, maybe encouraging them to drink water. So all of those supportive actions, how do we help that? And that is that very holistic view at that, right? We're not just talking about, I'm going to just do it for you. How do I let you do it first, and then I help you just when you need it, and do those things that also make you happy as well?
So do you see this coming soon?
Well, that depends on what you define as soon.
Okay. Well,
I
good
mean,
answer.
and
Touche.
people, truly, it's a very, very difficult problem, really. Like, and having worked in caregiving robotics now for quite a while, I can see the challenges the engineers have. But at least we're on the right like path of identifying what are the tasks that we need caregivers to be able to do once we have a caregiver shortage, and
Mhm.
how do we start moving towards that zone where they could replace, and could they do it in a different way? And MIT Lab is also kind of working towards looking at acceptance of robots, and how do people see that? Would they be willing to accept it? What kind of robot are they willing to accept? Short, tall, skinny? Like, should they look like a human? Should they look like a
Yeah.
toy?
Well, then the other question I have to ask is, will it ever be, well, I shouldn't say ever be, because I'm sure it will be, but is it in the near future possibly going to be financially um,
Affordable. Yes. The money
affordable,
part is
feasible?
very important.
I
And
mean,
just
are
like
they,
drug,
if they're $2,500, I'm in, right? I'd buy one for my mom today. If it's 25,000,
well, listen, that depends on what kind of robot you want. So right now, social robots that have conversations, that remember your stuff, there's a lot of development going on with AI being able to retain that information and create appropriate ones for you like that. Those are perfectly affordable. It's when you start to get into tasks, chores,
yeah,
like humans, like that cannot have a margin of error in it. So
yeah,
the development for those kinds of products is much, much higher because the standards are much more stringent. So I
yeah.
do think that, affordability, I think, will come down to maybe subscription plan type affordability, so that you would lease the robot instead of buying a robot and being responsible for all of the maintenance. But
But never,
social robots right now are totally reasonable right now.
but nevertheless, they still have to be, they still have to be available. They have to be usable, right? They have to be functional, all right? All those things. And I can sit here and think of all kinds of things they could do. But I would really appreciate it if you tell us in just a couple minutes what were your big takeaways, your ahas, the things you absolutely loved, were surprised at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
Oh, there's so much. You know what? But I want to start by saying that one of the most interesting like themes that I heard a lot was about trust because AI has this big, we're all talking about AI, right? Last year and
We're
the
using
2 years
it.
before. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're all using it. But what we're also recognizing is that because people are using it, they don't know anymore. Is that real? Like, is that a real person writing to me or is that a fake one?
Yeah.
Or is that like, is that marketing copy real or not? So there is a lot right now going on about trust and looking at, how do I know, like how can I believe that this is true? Now, one of the really neat things too that I thought is the idea that you have all these AI agents, but now you have an AI manager. So
Oh,
imagine like you have all these little people who can do their individual chores. They write emails for you, and this one is trained on like some other different software. Well, it's like a contractor. You need a AI to be managing all your
yeah.
different trades. So this concept of wait, we're now going to add another layer of AI to manage the AI, and the humans are going to, we're not taking the humans job, we're just moving the humans role into now as the AI supervisor. So making sure that the AI is not hallucinating and not, doing other things. We need human oversight. If we don't have human oversight, then we're done for. But
Yeah.
I found that very fascinating. I found
Yeah.
all of those ideas
Interesting.
very fascinating. And of course, like all of the fun gadgetry of glasses that have hearing aids, glasses that are have all the writing, the captions in there, real-time translation with Zoom. There were some really interesting things that AI is enabling people to be able to do and be more efficient and break down some of those like pain points that people have with working globally or even just acceptance, like acceptance of hearing aids. Well, don't worry, let's do glasses that can improve the hearing instead. So giving those other options
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of just keep trying to hammer in something that people don't want. Give them something
Yeah.
different, give it a different form factor or create it a different way.
Yeah. Fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating. Yeah. And um, yeah, fascinating. Carol Chang, I am just thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us on Always Ageless, your combination of your elite athletic determination, your deep clinical expertise, your cutting edge innovation, your determination for fixing and making things work. All of those are things that we need in this conversation, no matter where we are as a baby boomer, as a adult child of an aging parent, as a child care person, as an older person. All of us can use a lot from your knowledge and your sharing. And we love that you bring this honesty and you tell us whether staying put is good or not. So I hope that our listeners and our viewers are as inspired and learned as much from our time today, our short time today. I hope you'll come back again. But your message is clear, definitely. The aging with dignity, independence, and freedom isn't about luck. It's about planning, and it's never too early to plan, preparation, and making informed decisions with your eyes wide open. So, to our viewers and our listeners, whether you're 25, 35, or 85, whether you're planning for yourself, your aging parents, it's time to think about these things. Don't wait for a crisis. And remember that aging is not the enemy. We have referrals, by the way, all over the United States. If anyone who's listening and needs some help, Carol may not be in this state, but we all she's certainly available virtually, and we all have people all over the United States where we can help you. So enjoy. We enjoyed our time, and we ask our viewers and our listeners to enjoy whatever stage they are. We want you to be always ageless. Remember that you're never too old and you're never too young to start planning. So please remember, all of our listeners, please send us your questions, your emails. We will respond. And let's all go now and change the world and have the future that we deserve. Thank you, Carol Chang, very, very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.